Andrew Yang is an entrepreneur, he's an author, he's a philanthropist, and he's a nonprofit leader. Most of us know him as a 2020 Democratic candidate for president and a 2021 candidate for mayor of New York City. But he's done so much more. After working as a lawyer, executive at several early-stage technology companies, Andrew eventually became CEO of an education company. He has started a national entrepreneur nonprofit, Venture for America, which worked to empower thousands of young entrepreneurs to bring their dynamism to the communities across the country. He was named by President Obama as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship, and he's also the founder of Humanity Forward. Andrew is probably best known for his New York Times best-selling book, The War on Normal People, which helped introduce the idea of a universal basic income to the political mainstream. And now, with the creation of his Forward Party, Andrew has laid out the case for a variety of democratic reforms that can, as he says, unclog the pipes of our system and realign the incentives of legislators with the well-being of the American people. We are fortunate to host him tonight at the University of California, Irvine. He'll be speaking to us for about 30 minutes, after which he and I will have a conversation up here with some of the questions that have actually been submitted by our students ahead of time. So I hope you will please join me in welcoming Andrew Yang to the University of California, Irvine.
Thank you, Gold. Hello, UCI, how are you? It's great to be back in Orange County. I'm supposed to save this, but zot, zot, zot. It's a thrill to be here with you all. We are at an historic juncture in this country. How many of you all voted in the midterms? You definitely should have at least pretended on that one. I think I spotted a couple people. So the midterms were a positive surprise for me because I thought it was going to go very, very poorly for, let's say, one party vis-a-vis the other. But it seems like we are something of a 50-50 country right now, where it's like something of an even split. And where we are in this part of California, this might surprise some of you, but it's actually kind of purplish too. It's like a very appropriate place to have this conversation. You all probably know me. It's funny to say you know me from my presidential run in 2020. And the first time you heard about my run, I imagine it was something like this. There's an Asian guy running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Something like that? You guys remember that? You all remember that? Then you'll be able to be like, oh, is this real? Can you do that? But I never imagined myself running for president or even being a political candidate. I'm Asian, in case you didn't notice. But my parents were immigrants to this country from Taiwan. They met as graduate students at UC Berkeley. My brother's named after the Lawrence Hall of Science. So I used to joke my parents must have gotten busy at the Hall of Science. I'm sure they didn't. But I grew up as this kind of nerdy, bookwormish son of a physicist and statistician, and so they did not go around telling me, hey, you're going to run for office. They told me, clean your room, get good grades, go to a good school, try and get a good job. I think my dad's exact turn of phrase was, don't be a burden on society. So I tried to follow their advice. I went to college and then law school, and then practiced law very briefly, then left that to become an entrepreneur. How many of you all aspire to be entrepreneurs? Let's see a show of hands on that. Yes, very enthusiastic. That's an entrepreneurial hand wave. I'm actually going to give you the secret to entrepreneurship right now, just so you know. If you want to do something, just tell everyone you know you're going to do it. Because then you don't have a choice. You know what I mean? If someone talks about starting something but they haven't sang it from the rooftops yet, you can pretty much ignore them because they're not serious. But when they start singing it from the rooftops, you're like, oh, okay, now I should listen. So I sang it from the rooftops in my mid-20s that I was starting this company, and it totally flopped. So it was a very public failure in the sense that everyone I knew knew that I'd failed. It was a real confidence bruiser. But then I picked myself up, I worked at another startup, and then became the CEO of an education company that did quite well. At this point, my parents started talking to me again. They told their friends I was a lawyer for a while there. And then I started a nonprofit in 2011 called Venture for America. How many of you volunteered for a nonprofit? There's another show of hands where you should pretend, because that's pretty much like, are you a nice person? So nonprofits run on two things. What are they? Yeah, money, that's right. It's money and passion. So if you're the founder of a nonprofit, you have to be continuously energized and passionate and say, this is really, really important work. So I did that work for 6 years, got invited and honored by the Obama White House, so my in-laws were excited about me that week. So I had to bring my wife to meet the president. He has very large hands. But during that time, I traveled the Midwest and the South. I'm going to guess most of you are probably California products, right? Guessing, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm talking to you, I don't know your students. I can look up the stats. I figure most of your students are. Anyway, how many of you are from the Midwest? Let's try that. All right, actually, you're right. Surprisingly large number. South? So I had not been to a lot of the Midwest and the South until I started this entrepreneurship organization that operated in Cleveland, Birmingham, St. Louis, New Orleans, Baltimore, Detroit, a bunch of places I hadn't been before. And while I was traveling the country trying to help create jobs, I saw the aftermath of the elimination of millions of manufacturing jobs in the Midwest in particular, 4 million to be precise. And then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. You all remember that night? I think you might be announcing as we're here together, so I appreciate you all being here. We can watch his announcement when we all go home. So he announces he wins in 2016, and when he won, it was like a giant red flag to me. I said, oh my gosh, like this country has taken a very, very sharp turn in a dark direction. And I thought I understood a little bit why, because I had been to these communities, and if you look at the voter district data in 2016, there's a straight line up between the elimination of manufacturing jobs and the movement in each district from either blue or purple to red. And you can go through, it's in Ohio, it's in Michigan, it's in Wisconsin, it's in Pennsylvania. It's the most direct statistical correlation you can find. And so I thought, okay, we eliminated these manufacturing jobs. It drove the Midwest to Donald Trump. And I had many, many friends in Silicon Valley who were working on technologies that were going to do the same thing to various other categories of American workers. What percentage of Americans graduate from college? No one shout it out. It's a little more than a third. It's about 35%. So you have a country that's about 2/3 high school graduates. What are the 5 most common jobs in the US economy? Truck driver is number 4, trucking and transportation. Food service and food prep is number 3. Retail is number 2. Number 5 is manufacturing, and number 1 is clerical and administrative, which includes call center workers. So if you look at each of those job sectors, actually, what percentage of Americans work in one of those 5 categories? So again, that's clerical and administrative, retail, food service, trucking and transportation, and manufacturing. It's about half. It's 49% of workers work in one of these categories. Again, it's an economy that's comprised of 2/3 high school graduates. So these are jobs that high school graduates do. And if you look at each of these categories, many of them will shrink pretty quickly. When do you think Google's AI will be able to do the work of a call center worker? Yesterday. What day is today? I think it's Tuesday. They could do it Monday. So there are 2.5 million call center workers right now in the US, making about $16 an hour. So let's say Google's AI starts doing that job, and then that's an obvious one, but there are inobvious ones in insurance, in finance, in law, in creative fields. Right now, AI can actually produce journalistic accounts, pieces of artwork, music, like a lot of things that you would not think of as the province or domain of AI are actually right now coming online. So this is all stuff I'd figured out in 2017 after Trump won, and I went to my friends in Silicon Valley and I said, oh wait guys, Who's going to explain to the American people that we're going through this profound economic transformation, the fourth industrial revolution, it's going to speed up, not slow down, and we should transition to some other form of value transfer, something like a universal basic income, which I rechristened the freedom dividend. Why? Because it tested better with conservatives with the word freedom in it. So I went to my friends in Silicon Valley and said, who's going to make this case? And of course, they were all like, not me, not me, not me, not me. And then I was like, okay, guys, I get it. I guess I'll make this case. So I then went to my wife and said, hey, baby, I think I'm going to run for president. Like, what do you think? And then she, being a very loving partner, was like, of? And then I said, obviously, the United States of America. So there are only 2 rules in terms of who can run for president. What are they? 35 years or older and natural-born US citizens. So I was like, check and check, nothing stopping me. So I started telling friends, like, hey, I think I'm going to run for president on this freedom dividend. And then I had some good friends who said, okay, what's the maximum I can give you? Which was around $2,800, so they sent a check. And then I had other friends who were like, you're crazy, I'm not sure what you're doing. So I said, you'll figure it out later. It's totally fine. So I started running in 2018. I declare, and then start crisscrossing the country trying to generate energy for the campaign. So that's the story as to how I wound up on your TV screen or your smartphone. I ended up making 7 presidential debates, raised $40 million from almost 500,000 everyday Americans. Any members of the Yang Gang here? Thank you. Love you. Appreciate you. So we ended up having this outsized success and impact where, outcompeted a dozen senators, governors, cabinet secretaries, et cetera, et cetera. And I came off the trail, and I will confess to you all, I never thought I was going to be president. When the journalists would come and say, are you serious? You can't say, like, no, I'm not serious. So then you have to say, like, oh, there are multiple versions of victory. It's like, they have different, no. So I'll confess to you, I never intended, I never thought, I wasn't crying myself to sleep being I'm not president. I never thought I was gonna be president. But I did have a mission, and the mission was to mainstream universal basic income, which went from 27% approval when I started to 65% approval in 2020. So in a way, I should have been feeling pretty good about myself. CNN gives me a contract, I'm hanging out, and the rest of it, but I still felt terrible about the trajectory of our politics. I still felt like, wow, why does it seem like things are still just gonna get worse, not better, even though my campaign probably overachieved? And so I sat down and I did a bunch of research, because that's what I do when I'm trying to figure something out. I called some people I knew, I dug into the facts of it, and I figured out why I feel so bad about our politics. I figured out why you all feel so bad about our politics. We are being set up by the biggest design flaw in the history of the world. That design flaw is, depending upon how you look at it, maybe 160 years old. And I'm going to illustrate the design flaw to you through a couple of numbers. What is the approval rating for US Congress as we're here together tonight? I hear 20, I hear 30, it's about right. It's between 20 and 28%. So you could say 25%, it would be fairly accurate. 3 out of 4 Americans not happy with whatever is not happening or happening at a Congress. Not surprising, you all knew that. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress? 94%. So for those of you who are sports fans, it's a higher win rate than the Kevin Durant era Golden State Warriors. The challengers are the Sacramento Kings. I don't know, it's sports fans, that's fine. So why is there this massive gulf or disconnect? How can 3 out of 4 of us be unhappy? And then even this past race, like last week, if you dig into the numbers, you find out that you still have 90% plus of incumbents winning. Very, very few lose if they decide to re-up. So why is that such a massive gulf? It's because 90% of the congressional districts in the country are actually drawn to be either very blue or very red in the general. You kind of know if it's going to be a Democrat or a Republican representing you from the get-go. Now, if you're in one of the other districts, congratulations, you're in the 10% or so that are genuinely competitive. So what this means is if I'm a member of Congress and I know if I get through to the general election I'm going to win because my district is either blue or red, how can I actually lose my job? I have to get primaried from within my own party to really feel like I might lose my job. And if you look at the numbers, even again from last week, 2 out of 3 of the members of Congress who did lose their job, of the 24, 16 lost in the primary. The real threat is not the general. The real threat is your primary. So how do you keep from getting primaried from within your own party? You have to keep the 10 to 12% most rabid, hyper-partisans happy and off your back. If you do that, you get reelected. If you go against them, then your job security goes down pretty quick. It was a US senator who said this to me, and this is why we feel the way we do. She said, an issue is worth more to us unaddressed than addressed. Because if it's unaddressed, I can get you mad. I can get votes. I can raise money on it. What happens if I lean forward and try and address the problem? I get attacked from within my own party. I worked with the enemy. I'm ideologically impure. My job security goes down. I get primaried. This is why a number of years ago, you remember Marco Rubio stepping forward and proposing bipartisan immigration reform? You all remember that? If you don't remember that, don't worry, because what happened the following week? He said, I was just kidding. What happened in those 7 days? People from within his party said, Marco, what are you doing? If you do this, we're all going to take a beating. If you don't do it, we can just blame the other party and keep throwing red meat, and the country keeps going, and we keep our jobs. So Marco got his arm twisted pretty quick into saying, hey, I was totally kidding about that entire bipartisan immigration reform thing. And so you can advance to today and has anything happened on that issue? No, and you can put any of a whole host of issues in there for immigration reform, and it's the same story. Because you have a two-sided system now where each side is actually more rewarded for staying in their corner and blaming the other side than actually having to bridge the gap and do anything. What do you all think? Yeah, so we're going through this terrible, terrible design flaw where the political interests of each legislator is not in this please 51, 60% of us, it's just keep the 10 to 12% on the extreme off my back and happy, and then I get to keep my job. And then you have media organizations separating us into ideological tribes. You kind of know which team that channel is on, right? And then you have social media pouring gasoline on the whole thing, making it seem like we're all crazy people, and spreading lies and misinformation 6 times more rapidly and powerfully than anything positive or truthful. What do you all think? Is that a summary of the American situation? That's the political system. All right. So this is what I figured out in 2020. I would dug into this and was like, oh my gosh, is this going to get worse or better? Worse, because all of the forces of polarization are just getting stronger over time. Right now, 50%, almost 50%, it's like 43% of Democrats think Republicans are corrupt and a threat to the country. What percentage of Republicans think the same thing about Democrats? Same percentage. Shocker. It's like 42% of Republicans think Democrats are morally corrupt and a threat to the country. And those numbers are much, much higher than they were not that long ago. If you rewind a series of years, these parties were not at it like this. Those of you who are a little bit older, like me, remember when it was the competition was nothing like it is today. The polarization picked up. Well, it picked up in earnest in 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was passed, 1964, where the South flipped from Democrat to Republican. And then they got rid of the fairness doctrine under Reagan, where if you look at these old-timey news programs, you had to have 2 people talking, you had to present both sides of an issue. They got rid of that in the 80s. And then in 1994, MSNBC and Fox were founded. And then in 2004, Facebook came online. So you see this polarization just picking up steam. During this period also, 2,000 local newspapers went out of business. And local newspapers used to be relatively non-ideological about it because you can't report on high school sports and the bridge needing repair and then blame one side or the other. That doesn't make any sense. But those things all disappeared. And so now you just have these national narratives amplified by social media. So this stuff's going to get worse, not better. And the question is how, so I'm not someone who can scare you or make you sad without actually bringing some solution. So when I was doing all this research and figuring out that we're going through this terrible time that's going to get worse, I was like, okay, like there has to be a solution. And I'm happy to say I found it. There's a real life solution. And it's in the state of Alaska. I know. What could be in Alaska? So for those of you who are hardcore Yang Gang, you might be thinking it's like petroleum dividend, UBI, data dividend. No, that's not that. In 2020, Alaska got rid of their party primaries and replaced it with an open, nonpartisan primary where anyone can vote for anyone. How many of you saw what happened to Sarah Palin a couple months ago in the primary? You guys remember this? What happened to Sarah Palin? She lost, and she lost, frankly, to something of a nobody, like Mary Peltola, who got 9% of the vote in the first round. She's like a very earnest, positive state legislator, happens to be a native Alaskan. Sarah Palin's like a national political figure, a household name. So Sarah Palin had something like 35 to 40% Alaskans saying, yeah, Sarah Palin or bust. But then Sarah Palin couldn't get above 50% in the ranked choice voting. And this was an all-party primary where everyone could vote. So what happens in a normal process is Sarah Palin wins the Republican primary, then she runs against Mary Peltola in a general election, and she probably wins that too because this is a state that Trump won by 10 points. That's what we're used to. But now you just threw them all into the same, the same mix, and Mary Peltola was more broadly acceptable to 51% of Alaskans than Sarah Palin was, so Mary Peltola wins. If you get rid of the party primaries, all of a sudden the incentives we imagine to be in place, which is that they have to make 51% of us happy, actually apply in real life. Like it's not just the 10 to 12% on the side. This is one reason why Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator, she's the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who was also up for re-election this year. Think about that Venn diagram. Her popularity among Alaskan Republicans went down to 6% approval. They were like, you go against Trump? Now, you're our enemy. Trump then endorses I shouldn't say this, but a crazy person named Kelly Tshibaka, and then comes to Alaska and rallies for Kelly Tshibaka, being like, let's get rid of Lisa Murkowski. But Lisa Murkowski survives, and it looks like she's going to win. Why? Same reason. There's no Republican primary, so everyone could vote for everyone, and then all the independents and moderates and some Democrats said, you know what? I'm cool with Lisa Murkowski. Even if they decided that they were cool with Lisa Murkowski as their second choice after the Democrat, that's enough for her to get back in. The ballot initiative that turned the dial in Alaska and got rid of the party primaries cost $6 million. I'm going to suggest to you all that's a pretty freaking good bargain to liberate 2 US senators and a member of Congress and reduce extremism. What do you all think? So I saw this, I was writing this book in 2020, I saw what Alaska did in 2020, and I was like, ooh, this is gonna be great. The next race, it's gonna spell out the fact that it turns out that, like by definition, extremists don't get 51% of the vote. And so I thought, well, how the heck can we make this a reality in more states around the country? And so there were 3 paths I saw to make this happen in real life. Number 1, start a nonprofit. What was wrong with that plan? It wouldn't work. Also, the nonprofit already exists, and I'm on the board of that nonprofit. It's called Fair Vote. So, love them, but I was like, I don't think this is going to actually do it. Number 2, try and make these reforms happen from within the 2-party system. Why? He laughs. Why would that not work? First, immediately, half of the country will dismiss you out of hand because they're like, oh, you're a blue plot, you're a red plot, like, whatever you're trying to do, I'm sure it's bad for us. But the other thing is that it turns out that neither party really wants you to get rid of the primaries and open the system up. And how do I know this? Because I just came from Nevada where the exact same ballot initiative was on the ballot last week. And shockers, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party both came out against it. They both said, hey, this is bad. What was their rationale for saying you should not go to ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries? It'll hurt us and help the other team. I guess both teams did sort of think that. But the rationale they actually expressed was it's too confusing for voters. Literally, I was in Nevada. I was like reading other people's text messages they were getting. It's like, hey, the Democratic Party just texted me saying no on 3 because it's too confusing and cumbersome. I'm a dad. I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. You know what they can do? Order things 1, 2, 3. It's like, what ice cream do you want if they don't have chocolate? You know, I mean, like they can figure that out. So what is the real reason why the parties did not want this ballot initiative to pass in Nevada? Which, by the way, it did. So, you know, but what is the real reason why they fought it? It reduces their control and their certainty. Right now, their consultants know exactly who's going to vote. And they said, look, like we can actually predict and control, and in some cases, you know, like invest resources to get our vote within this pocket of people. But if you expand it to the entire electorate, we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe that people would actually want us to do something, you know, that solves their problem. Like it stops being about partisan bickering, and it starts being about delivering for people, families, and communities. You know what I mean? And if you don't deliver for people, families, and communities, then they'll get rid of you, which is probably, in my opinion, the way it should go down. So this was the path. I said, okay, it can happen from within the two-party system. So what do? You start a new positive unifying third-party movement that just raises its hand and says, you know what, I just want things to work better for us, the American people. I just want people to listen to us. And that starts with trying to do away with these party primaries and shift to nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting. So that was what I decided to do. So I started the Forward Party, which now, 13 months in, is already the third biggest political party in the country by resources. Just came from Nevada, where they got rid of party primaries and are shifting to ranked choice voting, and now we have our eyes on other states. We're going around, and simultaneously, we're getting on the ballot in California here next year. We're already on the ballot in Texas and Connecticut. We hope to be on the ballot in 15 states over the next 4 months, and then 30 by the end of next year. So the goal is to create real choice and dynamism and accountability in a political system that right now just doesn't have it. If you're here in California, I mean, there are some Republicans, but the fact is this is more or less a one-party state. Democrats have a supermajority in Sacramento. The same is true in New York, where I live. The same is true in 37 states around the country, where one party controls everything. And I'm going to suggest to you all that one-party rule just is not the best in terms of like accountability or representation or dynamism. Like it just becomes sort of about covering for each other and not really about delivering. And so our goal is to try and create real choice in states around the country by opening the system up. So we hope to be here in California on the ballot next year. But we want to help in both Massachusetts and Mississippi. We want to go to places and say, look, whatever your frustration is with what's happening or not happening in your community, let's try and rebuild the connection between us and the people that are supposed to represent us. So that is the new mission. And for those of you who did keep up with my presidential campaign, what I've concluded really is that all of the good things we want to happen, and you can just put anything you want in the category of good things, they're highly unlikely to happen from within this current political system. So it's only by rejuvenating and modernizing our democracy that we have a chance to deliver on the promise, to make sure that we can deliver the future you deserve for the next generation. Because in my mind, we have let you down at a colossal scale. Like if you're a young person and you feel like things are not trending positively, you are generally correct. We've left you something of a mess, but I would certainly love your help in cleaning it up. Thank you all very much. All right, we'll go back here.
So thank you for that. We have a number of questions that were given to us by students. We'll start off with one that goes very much to the introduction that I gave. So you've done a whole lot of things, and you've been successful at a whole lot of them. What do they have in common? How have you been so successful at so many things you've done?
Well, I don't know if you heard my talk, but
I did notice you didn't become president, but other than that, you've been quite successful in many things.
Well, I mean, I was saying I had a series of failures in my 20s, and more recently. I think the single best thing I have going for me is that you don't let a failure define you. And when you're young and you fail, it feels definitional. It feels like, okay, I am a failure. But as you get a certain level of experience, you have a little bit more of like a batting average mentality where, like what's a good batting average for a pro ball player? 300 would be great. And now if you get 30% on your test, you fail, and so that's bad. But if you get a 30% hit rate in, for example, sales, you're an all-star, Like if you get a 30% hit rate on donor asks, it's pretty freaking good. So a lot of it is about just getting enough experience under your belt where you can take the failures more in context and stride and not. And by the way, I was terrible at this when I was young. When I was young, I got really, really down on myself. I would berate myself if I screwed up, and I'd be like, "Oh, you're terrible," like blah blah blah. And so that was maybe the single biggest learning I needed in my 20s was to be able to take failure more in stride.
I think that's great advice for our students. On that line, one of the things I've noticed is you worked at a large law firm, and I did as well at one point, and I was taken by a quote that I've seen from you, that it was the worst 5 months of your life working at a large law firm.
Yeah.
So for students in the audience who are thinking about careers in law, political change, or the like, what should they be doing then?
I thought you were going to reference another quote of mine from that same time, which was, working at the law firm was like a pie eating contest, and if you win, they give you more pie. So, I don't begrudge. I actually kind of envied my friends who were enjoying that work. It just wasn't a fit for me, in part because to be good at that job, you needed to be able to visualize all of the worst things that could happen in a particular situation. And I thought to myself, I don't want to spend my 20s thinking of the most terrible occurrences possible. Like, I want to spend my 20s building something. So it just wasn't a good fit for me, but I have friends who were very happy in that context, and I think for me it's like really just to each their own. It's like if you find something that's a good fit for you, then embrace it and own it, and it's great. It just wasn't a good fit for me, and the stuff that I wanted to do in terms of building things, it turns out it was very, very hard, and I had significant setbacks and failures, but it's one reason why I feel so fortunate today is that I actually can start something and see it into the world. And when I was younger, that was like my fondest aspiration.
That's wonderful. Let's switch gears a little bit. A week ago, we had an election in California. That election apparently is still not over as we continue to count ballots. But as you look at results around the country, what's your interpretation and what's the message from the election last week?
You kind of know who certain people are going to vote for. The question really is, where do independents go? And independents broke for Democrats between 2 and 4 points nationwide. And people did not expect that. People thought they were going to break Republican because of inflation and anti-incumbency and it being a midterm and everything else. I was very happy about the result. Like I thought it was going to be a red wave, and I thought that was going to be a bad thing. But we should know how the mechanics of our government work, is that if Republicans win the House by 1 seat, 2 seats, 3 seats, which by the way is probably what's happening, it might be like 4 or 5 seats, Democrats aren't going to be able to pass anything, even with the Senate. If you have the Senate and the White House, you know what you have? Judicial appointments, which is important, but you don't have any legislation. And that's just the way our system is baked right now. And that's, by the way, deeply unhealthy. Like there's nothing in our founding design about 2 parties, nothing in our founding design about political parties. Their presumption was, hey, we got 435 members of Congress, they will do the people's work, whatever that means. What they did not predict was that you have this polarized country that if one party has like a 1-seat majority, then very, very little will happen. So that is the situation. Even though we had, in my mind, like a more positive election day than I expected, we shouldn't have any illusions about what it's going to mean in terms of legislation and policy.
Well, so is the issue that we're a polarized country, or is it the system, as you were describing earlier, that's set up in a way that takes advantage of that polarization?
It's both, and they're feeding into each other. So if you're a member of Congress, again, and things don't happen on your watch, like you're not really judged harshly for it. 9 times out of 10. Like it really does not touch you, particularly in a country now where the states are like either reddening or bluening. I just made up a word. I don't know what. I'm getting more blue. But these negative incentives, unfortunately, are now cumulative. Where if I'm in a deep red state and if I compromise with the Democrats, I'm definitely going to get challenged in a primary. I supported a guy named David McKinley, who was a Republican in West Virginia, who lost his race. You know why? Because he supported the infrastructure bill. And his argument was infrastructure bill would be good for West Virginia. I'm a civil engineer. I cannot in good conscience vote against this infrastructure bill. You know what the Republicans in West Virginia heard? Compromised with the enemy, and he lost. So, that's a recipe just for terrible, terrible policy. And that's what we're getting.
I'm wondering whether it's more than all of that. So you referenced that you were surprised by the fact that it was not a red wave, and I think many observers were surprised by that. Is there anything also wrong with the way we are covering politics today, or even the way polling is done?
Yeah, so it's the thing that is the deepest fear I have is that at this point we're essentially in this character drama, but what's happening in terms of policy and in communities may or may not have any relationship with even the ideas that are being put forward by these parties. So to your point, John, Republicans were hammering what points? Inflation/economy, crime and public safety, immigration. Democrats were hammering what points? Democracy, abortion, and then you could argue what the third one was. I saw healthcare in one poll. I saw there are different things for their third. Now, I'll say even though voters trust Republicans more in the economy, do we really think that they had some genius anti-inflation, anti-crime plan, or that they were doing something in immigration? It's what's happening is that we're having ideological arguments, and then if your side wins, sometimes it filters down to policy, but a lot of the time it doesn't. A lot of the time it's just I like this team more, I feel better, and at this point I'm just voting on feelings. If you actually get down to the reality of what's happening in our communities, it is getting worse, objectively, for everyone, blue or red. We're 31st in the world at public education, infant mortality, life expectancy, clean water. Whatever the basics are, we're getting, by the way, we're getting worse too. And that's true under a Democratic or Republican administration. And so if you have Democrats winning, it's okay, one team feels good, the other team doesn't feel good.
Excuse me, Mr. Yang. On the topic of public education, 48,000 academic workers are currently on strike at the University of California. So does the Forward Party endorse crossing picket lines to collect a speaking fee, or is that a unique personal position?
Answer or not answer, your call.
I confess to not being aware of the particulars of what's going on in terms of negotiation. I can't really comment.
Thank you.
I'm sure that would be quite surprising to...
Thank you very much. Please leave. That's not what this event is for. That's not what this event is for. Plenty of other opportunities for us to discuss that issue on campus. But let's use some of this as a transition to a slightly different question. So you've been known for your emphasis on the economy and on the guaranteed income. Has the changing market, has changing inflation rates affected at all your views on the importance of that?
No, I feel terrible for families when I see the inflation rates, because there are a lot of folks who are on the edge even before COVID or this year. And if you make things less affordable for them, they're making really, really painful, difficult decisions. And I think it's affecting people's health, mental health, educational outcomes. You name it. I am a parent. I've got 2 kids, and I think they made it through this time. okay, but like there are times when I think that they were socially somewhat stunted, which is probably true of just about any kid during this era. So, like when I see the inflation numbers, I actually don't see it in political terms. I see it in like pain among families, and to the extent that there was something that we could do about it, it was the enhanced child tax credit that was passed during the COVID relief packages that lifted several million kids out of poverty. 174 economists said this is the best thing we've done in a generation. And so, of course, we ended up getting rid of it at the beginning of this year because we're in a time when what happens with people and families. And when we got rid of it, I actually waited to see what happened, whether there was like an outcry or protests. Like, millions of families all of a sudden aren't getting a lifeline they were getting. And there was nothing. And so what it reminded me is that, one, if you're living hand to mouth, you don't really have time to go out and protest or do whatever. Maybe you're not on social media. But also just how invisible and unheard a lot of those folks are. So that's what I think of when I see the inflation numbers, honestly.
Should we be going beyond where we are right now, and if so, where?
Yeah, and so this is what my presidential campaign was on in many ways, which is that I think we need to go deeper and try and figure out how to put people on a better path to succeed. And I made this comment toward the end about young people. I mean, what's the American dream by definition? That you're going to do better than your parents did, right? I mean, that's why my parents came here, and it generally worked for me and my brother. And the question is, do the next generation feel the same way, or will you actually live that way? And by the numbers, fewer than 50% of kids are going to do better than their parents, which is a recipe for unrest and anger and despair and mental health problems and a bunch of other things. And so that's the concrete reality that no one seems to care about, that just drives me up a wall, where if you're one party or the other, it's like, hey, I've got my ideological arguments I'm going to make, and you're going to like these better than the other guys, and so vote us back in. But it's this gradual immiseration of the American people that never gets addressed because what happens to people doesn't matter in our system.
Bernie Sanders supports workers, why don't you? Your party's a joke.
Thank you for coming.
Support workers.
Thank you for coming. So you're talking about the changing economy. One of the big things is automation that we're seeing. So what do you envision about the future of the workforce and the economy given all of this and the effect on these workers and these families that you're talking about?
So if you are in the knowledge class, which you're all going to be by virtue of graduating from UCI, again, top 35% of the population gets a college degree, and UCI is an exceptional school, so you can do the math on where you'd fall. You're largely going to be just fine. And I say this knowing that when you're a young person, you never feel that. When you're a young person, you feel like the entire future is insecure, and you're stressed out, and you're not sure what your place is going to be in the world. But then if you do start going to different places and different communities, then your confidence level really does go down. And I talked in the beginning about some of the obvious and inobvious impacts of AI. And so what I'm hoping we can do is try and to progress as a society quickly enough so that you don't have this water level rise, to the extent that it's over a lot of people's heads, which when it happens, people respond really, really poorly and angrily, a lot of the time. It's not a super rational conversation at that point.
Well, you are at a university where, as you've seen, we value free speech and conversation. One of the other things that's somewhat related to that in terms of our emphasis, especially in a school of social ecology, is this focus on social goods and ecological sustainability. So, and this is right from one of our students, so is an economy where the accumulation of wealth and profit is the ultimate aim compatible with that flourishing science and technology sector? No,
I think we should be measuring our growth and progress in different ways than we are now. And the example I use is that AI is going to be great for GDP, but it's going to be very bad for those call center workers and a lot of other people. So if you're just following GDP, you're just going to keep following it off a cliff. So how should you measure how we're doing? I would argue we should measure it by how we're doing. You know what I mean? Just have a series of measurements around life expectancy and educational outcomes and environmental quality and mental health. You can have measurements for these things. And my dream is to have a dashboard up in the halls of Congress and just have a series of measurements. And if you're a member of a different party, you can say, look, I'm all about that measurement, not that measurement. But as long as you're actually accountable for something, then it would be an enormous leap forward. Because right now, that accountability is completely lacking. You know, they can come and they can like see those numbers all go down, or they don't even know what the numbers are. Because you know what numbers they do know, though? How much money they've raised, and how much money their opponent has, against them. I mean, at this point, our legislators are raising money 30 to 60% of their hours. You know, like imagine that. You get through the system and you go to DC, and then they show you to your fundraising cubicle in party headquarters. And that's how you climb the ladder. And I don't think that's healthy. You know, so like you just need a different dashboard for all of our sakes.
All right, so if we had a dashboard, what would be the 3 most important measures that would be of importance to you?
You know, I think I referenced them. You know, I'd say the basics would be like health outcomes. I mean, you know, if you're dying younger, which by the way we are by the numbers, deaths of despair are going up, like all these really noxious indicators. So number 1 would be health. Number 2 would be education. And then number 3 would be environmental quality. I think those would be my top 3.
So the economy, the health of the economy, not one of your top 3.
No, I guess it wouldn't be. You know, you kind of caught me there. Like,
And? I mean, final answer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with
Okay.
you know with what I said.
Okay. So, and by the way, that I respect the fact that you're bold.
I mean, at this point, you know, like our economy, gosh, it's such an abstraction, and we've all been more or less brainwashed into thinking that we serve the economy, like the almighty economy, and we have to become efficient market actors. And if we fail, then it's because we failed, and we just need to hustle harder and reinvent ourselves and retrain, like all the stuff that it's not human, really. A lot of it. It's like we've kind of become. And by the way, this is as someone who, like, you know, was/is sort of into that stuff, just in the sense that, you know, like I imagine myself to work hard. I imagine myself to try and achieve. I have goals. I do have my own dashboard. I'm like trying to hit it all the time. But I think that's a terrible way to try and organize yourself as a society. It's a terrible way to try and set people up when it's essentially the difference between having a good life and not having a good life. You can't have a system where someone needs to, you know, like outrace the machines in order to live a good life in an era where the machines are just going to get faster and smarter.
All right, so you were in Orange County. I mean, the newer Orange County, not the old one. Tax is not one of the top measures.
I don't know what you just measure being like, how's the tax rate? You know, now I think that we should get smarter. Where right now, again, let's say Google invents this AI. How much will Google pay in taxes? Next to nothing. They'll just move it through Ireland and call it a day. So we need a tax system so the best proxy for AI is probably just cloud computing. You just hit like cloud computing with a tax at a certain level, and then as AI gets smarter and they use more cloud computing, then the public sees more revenue. And by the way, that would be really difficult to like game your way out of if you're one of these companies. So when you say, you know, tax rate, I'm going to suggest is your tax system actually intelligently designed?
And how should we be more intelligently designing it?
Well, so we should be taxing where the value is going. One of my jokes on the presidential trail is like, I don't care about the town dentist. I care about Amazon and Jeff Bezos. You know what I mean? Like, and right now the political conversation is like pitting us against each other at like this town level. It's like, no, like they're playing us. Like he's over there, like sending rockets to Mars. Like, let's go like get some of the cloud computing money because his AI is about to. By the way, Amazon furiously automates its own workers away, and they're open about it. They say to the executives, like, your job is to get rid of your job, and then they hop in there and then they try and make themselves extraneous. So our system right now is not intelligently designed, and you don't want to tax things you want more of. I'm going to suggest that one of the things we want more of people is to find positions that they're excited about, that are productive and maybe fulfilling and all these other things. Our tax system is designed for a very, very different time and economy.
So you mentioned Google, you mentioned technology. We see a lot of disparities in access to technology. Some high-speed Wi-Fi, the ability for students and others to get even basic computers. What can be done to reduce those social disparities in the access to technology?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in rural America running for president, and there were a lot of places where you didn't have broadband or fast internet, and that compounds some of the other problems. And there's not a great market incentive on wiring those neighborhoods, not neighborhoods, I mean those areas, those regions. So this is something where you just need to say, look, this is a public good. I mean, there are a lot of things I think that we should regard as a public good. Connectivity would be one. I think local journalism should actually be like something that we see as a public good, because it was something that was keeping us from each other's throats. Like if you just have national news filling the void, then you wind up with this very, very polarizing ideological media source, and then you have a small town where they're fighting over stuff that has nothing to do with their lives, because they got ginned up to it by these companies many states away. I'd much rather they have a news source emanating out of their town library that gets financed publicly.
So we've seen a number of technologies that, I guess I'll say, erode democratic values. And they certainly spread, or they can be used to spread misinformation. Do you see anything else that's out there that's coming that may also be dangerous, or that we ought to be thinking about how we're going to be addressing it?
I mean, it's social media utilized to its fullest extreme, which is likely through deepfakes, where you'll have synthetic videos that are indistinguishable from real videos, which it can include voice recordings. So you can have someone doing or saying anything on a video, and then people will be like, oh, I saw it. And then you're going to have a time when someone can legitimately be like, wasn't me, even if it really was them. They'll just be like it's going to be very hard to distinguish fact from fiction, because no matter what I show you, you'll be like, I just don't believe it. And the technology, unfortunately, is at that point where if you layer that on top of social media, it's going to be very hard to have a democracy where you're supposed to agree on certain truths.
Are we going to be able to ever agree on certain truths as a country again?
So I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and I remember a time when there were 3 TV networks, and then Fox came along, and it was a big deal, The Simpsons and all that. There's no going back to that time or era. The major question in American life is, are we going to be able to reconstitute a sense of institutional trust that simulates what we had at that era? And the numbers are discouraging. Trust in various institutions just keeps on going down and down. And then the question is, can you turn that around? It's one reason why I think what we're doing in terms of democracy reform is so important, is that if you have these two different tribes contesting things, it's going to be very, very hard for us to try and rebuild trust. You need a referee at a minimum. Like one of the jokes is that if you have 2 sports teams fighting each other all the time, like how do the fan bases feel about each other over time? Like at some point you need to have an arbiter referee come in and say, hey guys, we're going to agree on something. And then if you can agree on that, if you imagine the dashboard, imagine if everyone could agree on the dashboard. Like that would be an enormous leap forward from where we are now. Is this easy? Is this likely? You know, it's like, to me, it's our best hope, because a lot of these technologies have a negative relationship with functioning democracy. I don't know if you know this, where if you look at the adoption of social media and other things, it actually correlates to backsliding into autocracy in terms of like what happens around the world. Are we immune to that? No. So we're going through our own version of it. And the question is whether we can correct in time.
Can we?
You would need to do a lot of things differently than we're doing now. But I think it's going to be a race. There's a quote from Buckminster Fuller, who's an inventor that I really admired. But he says that the race between dystopia and utopia is going to be like down to the wire. Where you're going to be bouncing between like very negative or very positive outcomes, and you don't know who's going to win. You're not going to know who's going to win the whole time. And so in my best version of the world is that we're building towards the utopia, even as the dystopia is creeping up, and then we can like kind of win at the very end, that foot race, like run through the tape. But that only happens if you're actually working on the positive version.
All right, so let's see if we can get ourselves a utopia here. You have out here a number of people who are very much the future of the country. I'm going to give you a magic wand. You can pick 3 things for our young people, our students here to be working on going forward. It's a magic wand, so it can be, you can actually make this happen. What would be the 3 things?
I could give you a set of priorities that I think are important institutionally, but genuinely, I would advise the people here to try and find a project or organization or person that they're excited about and just like work with them and support them, and then maybe at some point become them or even better than them. And that's very much individual. Like I would never say, hey, everyone do like, let's say the thing I'm working on, because like you're different people, you're gonna want to do different things. So I think if you were to ask me, I would say just to ask more of yourself in terms of the contribution you can make to an organization or a cause or company or a person. And as long as you're pushing yourself, I think that's all we can ask of you. It's not to solve a specific problem. It's to just kick butt at whatever you're doing, wherever you're going. Just take yourself seriously. You guys should know that you all are among like the highest potential, biggest potential contributors the country has.
All right, now let me give you the wand back to come up with 3 policy initiatives. And you can actually make these happen as opposed to them getting stopped in Congress or wherever.
All right, number 1 is ranked choice voting. If you had ranked choice voting across the board, everything gets better really, really quick. And so, you know how I got UBI from 27% to 65%? Now my new goal is to get ranked choice voting from wherever it is now to like 65 or 80%. So if you all take one thing away, like ranked choice voting is our skeleton key out of this thing. The second thing would be new measurements for the economy. Let's just like see how we're doing and then hold people to say, look, like this has to get better. When I say new measurements for the economy, it should be about us. It's like, why are we using these proxies for how we're doing? And just like see how we're doing would be the second. And then the third, and this goes with ranked choice voting, it's like I do think that you need more than 2 tribes in this country. I think the ideal number of political parties would probably be something like 5, where the current Democratic Party is 2 parties, the current Republican Party is 2 parties, you have maybe 1 party in the middle, and then maybe a party on one side or the other, so maybe you can get to 5, 6, or 7. If you have, we're a country of 330 million people, like does 2 parties really make sense? This really is like the worst design ever. And we're anomalous around the world. Like the world does not have a system like ours. For good reason, by the way. The system's not serving us well. So by the time you're our age, if we're at that type of system, which by the way, there's a law in Congress that would get us a lot of the way there. It's called the Fair Representation Act. It has, maybe like half a dozen sponsors. But what it does is it moves us from single-member congressional districts to multi-member districts and allows for multiple parties. If you pass that law, then we're 75% of the way to what I'm describing. So this stuff is not fantasy. This can be our reality if enough of us raise our hands and say, look, this system right now is not working for us.
So we only have a couple minutes left. While you and I have been speaking, former President Donald Trump just announced his re-election campaign. So here is your first opportunity to comment on the fact that Donald Trump is running for president again.
Just the fact that this man successfully ran for president and may be the Republican nominee this time around just shows how much our system needs an upgrade, needs a revamp. And I will actually extend this to the other party. Like, I think the most likely nominee in the Democratic Party is President Biden. And so if you have a Biden versus Trump rematch, I want you all to reflect on what that would say about our system. Their combined age will be 159 in 2024. And in a country of 330 million people, do we really think that those are going to be like the two best choices? So I hope that our system shows an ability to rejuvenate itself. But Trump declaring tonight, I think it speaks volumes to where the country is right now. And I do think he's going to do well in his primary.
So you mentioned the combined ages would be 159. Any chance we're going to see the combined number of candidates be closer to 200 and something with you thinking about running for office again?
Be closer to 200 something? Wow.
Well, I'm giving you like 40.
Oh, wait, you're giving me, you
yeah,
mean my age
yeah, you're
would
like
get
about 40
lumped in
years
there.
old, right?
I am a numbers guy, and 58% of Americans are not excited about the two options I just described. And so I think there's going to be a ton of energy immediately. So the average American is going to look up like this and be like, okay, well, what's happening? What are my choices? And be like, oh, do I have any other choices? That they're going to look around. There are people right now working on making it so that there are other choices. And for me, I will say, I hope you all gather this about me. I'm not driven by a desire to hold office or a particular perch. I just want to see our country through to a positive outcome where our lives are improving and we're not living in fear all the time. So if there's something that I can do that pushes us in that direction, I'll seriously consider it. And there are people I know that are in the same boat.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on.
Thank you, UCI, appreciate you.
So, one moment. So as I said at the beginning, the School of Social Ecology very much believes in engaging with the world around us. Andrew Yang, you are the epitome of those ideals. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us today, for putting up with what a university is about, with some of the interruptions, which is core to our mission. And I hope you will all please join me in thanking Andrew Yang for being with us this evening.
Thank you, UCI. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.